It started with a scream that didn't belong in the forest. Not the scream of a coyote or the distant call of a hawk, but a high-pitched, human shriek of pure panic echoing across the pines. I was in my cabin halfway through sharpening my chainsaw blades when the sound shattered the silence. By the time I reached the ridge, binoculars in hand, what I saw made my blood run cold. A woman on a red ATV was fishtailing wildly down my private trail, right toward Widow's Drop, the infamous 200-foot cliff at the edge of my land. No guardrails. No mercy. Just empty air and jagged rock below. And the idiot barreling toward it? None other than Karen Whitmore, the president of the HOA down in the valley, who had ignored every posted warning and every legal notice. One moment she was waving to a drone camera, the next she was screaming for her life. And all I could think was, she has no idea what's coming. 48 hours earlier, things were quiet. I just returned from a supply run in town and was unpacking trail cams and new fencing material when the trouble began. A neighbor from across the valley, old Marvin, flagged me down at the post office. He had that worried look that only ever meant one thing in these parts: Karen was up to something. Marvin, whose niece lived 2 doors down from the Whitmores, showed me a Facebook post Karen had made. There she was, in her flashy reflective jacket, standing next to her custom red ATV with her signature KW vanity plate, grinning like she'd discovered gold. The caption read, "This Saturday I conquer the Forbidden Trail. #Karen Canyon Challenge," followed by 3 fire emojis and a tagged group of local influencers. I should have felt angry, but honestly I just felt tired. This wasn't the first time Karen had targeted my land. Ever since she became HOA president, she had been trying to open up the natural trail system that ran through my mountainside property to her community of bored suburbanites. Every meeting she brought it up. Every time I declined politely. And every time she upped the pressure. She'd already tried sending me phony violation notices, even though I wasn't part of her HOA. Once she had the nerve to tell the sheriff that I was hoarding nature. The sheriff just rolled his eyes and told her to stick to her side of the county. What made things worse was that Karen had no clue what the trail really was. It wasn't a friendly hiking loop or a community bike path. It was an old logging route from my grandfather's time, rutted, steep, and filled with loose shale and switchbacks that were only manageable on foot or horseback. Worse still, it ended in a sheer vertical cliff known as Widow's Drop, named after a hunter's wife whose husband disappeared after a misstep there nearly 50 years ago. The path had been closed off decades ago with warning signs, fences, and erosion barriers. But Karen had bulldozed all that history with one reckless idea and a GoPro. That same afternoon I returned to my property and did a full inspection of the trail. Sure enough, someone had cut through the lower gate. I found fresh ATV tracks pressed into the dirt and tire grooves right through my sapling grove. My chest tightened. The lower end of the trail was barely stable. Karen's ATV might survive the first half, but if she reached the upper turns with speed, there was no way she'd see the cliff until it was too late. Especially not if she was showing off. I spent the night installing motion sensors, trail cameras, and even a passive GPS interference node I designed back in my engineering days. The node didn't block emergency signals, but it would disable casual GPS so that her tracker would go haywire mid-trail, hopefully forcing her to slow down. I knew she'd be coming, and I also knew she wouldn't listen to reason. Karen didn't believe in limit. She believed in attention. And I'd seen enough to know she was setting this up like a social media stunt, not a real ride. Sure enough, the next day, right at sunrise, I saw the beginnings of what she had planned. Her teenage son was on site with a drone crew. A couple of SUV loads of HOA groupies stood around sipping energy drinks and adjusting selfie stick. Karen arrived like she was entering a rally, revving her engine and waving like a parade queen. Her ATV was freshly washed, her helmet bedazzled, and her arrogance as blinding as the sun behind her. I walked down the trailhead holding my map and geological assessment chart. I tried one last time. I explained the erosion zones, the blind curve before the cliff, the unpredictable shale layers. I even showed her a photo of the drop-off, vertical, jagged, unforgiving. She glanced at it, laughed, and said, "That's just your boomer paranoia. My rig can handle anything." I stared at her for a moment, unsure if I was more shocked by her stupidity or her ego. "This isn't Fast and Furious, Forest Edition," I said. But the crowd laughed at me. Her son shouted, "Let the Queen ride," and they all cheered. I backed away. I had done everything I could legally and ethically. All that was left was hope, that something would stop her before physics did. By noon, Karen mounted the ATV like she was going to war. She made a show of fastening her glittery helmet and checking her mic. "This is for all the women told to stay off the trail," she shouted. "Today I ride for freedom." I nearly choked on my thermos coffee. It was so ridiculous it would have been funny, if it weren't so horrifying. As she sped off into the trees, her fans watching on a livestream, I hiked up a parallel ridge to monitor her location. My sensors pinged one by one as she tore past checkpoints. Her drone flew high above her, recording every bounce and spray of mud. She was reckless, even ignoring the safe speed markers I had painted on the ground in neon orange. At the halfway point, she hit a patch of loose dirt and almost flipped, but kept going. My heart was pounding. This woman was charging into death like it was a shopping mall grand opening. Then came the sound that would stick in my ears forever. Her engine, louder now, echoed through the pines, sputtering, revving, then a sudden scream that snapped through the forest like a lightning bolt. I raced toward the overlook and raised my binoculars. She had reached the curve near Widow's Drop, too fast, too wild, and had lost control. But instead of plummeting, she had somehow hit a nylon line I'd installed overnight as a last-ditch safety net. It snagged her back wheels and spun her sideways. Her ATV landed in a thud, just 10 feet from the cliff's edge. One of her tires spun uselessly in the air. She wasn't moving. For a moment, time froze. Then her drone hovered into frame, capturing her sprawled on the dirt, helmet cracked, ego shattered. Her crowd below gasped. One of the HOA ladies screamed and dropped her phone. And I just stood there, heart still hammering, and whispered under my breath, "That trail doesn't take prisoners, Karen. It takes fools." The air was buzzing with disbelief. Karen's crowd stood frozen at the trailhead, murmurs rippling through them like static as her drone hovered above the scene of her near-fatal stunt. Her son, no longer cheering, was staring at the live feed on his phone with a face drained of color. For a moment, even the birds seemed to go silent as everyone tried to process what had just happened. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the mountain, lay motionless in the dirt just a few feet from Widow's Drop, the cliff that had no mercy and gave no second chances. I descended the ridge quickly, not because I was worried for her safety, she was breathing, shifting slightly, but because I knew what was coming next. Blame, deflection, and the start of the real storm. By the time I reached the group, the paramedics had already been called by one of the more sensible onlookers. Her son was pacing nervously, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The drone operator had landed the device and was reviewing the footage, muttering something about crazy engagement numbers. A few others looked shaken, the adrenaline fading into realization that they had all just been witnesses to something that could have turned tragic in an instant. Karen, with a cracked helmet and a scraped-up jacket, sat upright now, visibly rattled but already slipping into performance mode. "I lost control because of something on the trail," she declared, her voice raspy but loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "That rope," he set a trap. There it was. I didn't respond right away. I just crossed my arms and waited for her to finish this particular brand of nonsense. Her voice gained strength as she warmed into her new role as the victim. "He knew I was riding today. That's why he rigged the trail. He put up that wire to catch me. It was sabotage." Some of the onlookers nodded, unsure whether to believe her or not, while others were clearly uncomfortable. One of the HOA members I recognized, Clara, a middle-aged woman with a sense of reason usually drowned out in Karen's noise, stepped forward and said, "Karen, we all saw the signs. You went past 3 of them. You posted about this challenge days ago. You knew it was dangerous." Karen shot her a glare that could melt glass, then turned her focus back to me. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she hissed. "I have witnesses. You tried to kill me." I held up my phone and calmly replied, "I have GPS data, trail camera footage, and timestamps showing exactly what you did. You trespassed, ignored posted warnings, and endangered your entire group for a social media stunt. I didn't try to hurt you, Karen. I tried to stop you from dying." Her son looked down, visibly shaken, and walked off without a word. When the paramedics arrived, she insisted on being stretchered down even though she could walk. She wore her neck brace like a badge of martyrdom and made sure the cameras caught every angle of her being loaded into the back of the ambulance. I noticed her ATV had been towed carefully away from the cliff, its front axle mangled and its rear tires flat from the impact. The rope trap, as she called it, had been a safety measure, something I'd installed using mountaineering-grade nylon anchored by breakaway pegs, designed to slow a runaway ATV just before the fatal bend. It wasn't elegant, but it had worked. She should have thanked me. Instead, she was plotting her next public appearance. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving behind only whispers and discarded coffee cup. I hiked back to my cabin, checking the motion sensors along the way and collecting the footage from the upper trail cams. Everything was intact. The time stamps, the warning signs in the background, the footage of Karen blowing past each checkpoint with a grin on her face. It was all there. That night, as I reviewed the files on my laptop, I saw the moment she hit the mudslide section and almost flipped. Her expression changed instantly from smug joy to raw fear. For the first time, she realized the trail wasn't a joke. But by then it was too late. The momentum had carried her forward into the curve of no return. By the next morning, the video was online. Not posted by me, but by her own drone crew. They had decided to cash in on the drama, uploading a highlight reel of the stunt with dramatic music and a freeze frame right at the moment she skidded to a stop near the drop. The title read, "HOA President Nearly Dies in Forbidden Trail Challenge, Must See." It went viral in under 12 hours. Comments flooded in. Some hailed her as brave. Others called her insane. But the majority? They weren't buying her story. Especially once others began posting the warning signs she'd ignored. One local hiker stitched together clips of the trail's clearly posted barriers and her own bragging posts from days before. That video went even more viral, flipping public opinion almost instantly. Karen tried to regain control. She went live from her living room, wearing a fresh brace and claiming emotional trauma. "I was lured into a false sense of safety," she said dramatically, dabbing at tears that didn't exist. "He should have done more to stop me." But the internet doesn't forget. Within minutes, people reposted her original post where she said, "No one can stop me now, not even that old man with his ancient trail signs." That line alone became a meme. People photoshopped her onto roller coasters, cliffs, even launching into space, all with that line in bold letters across the top. But things really escalated when the local news picked it up. A reporter visited the trailhead, interviewed me briefly, and aired a segment comparing her stunt to reckless endangerment. The reporter even walked the first half of the trail, showing the posted signs, the broken gate, and the spot where she'd nearly flown off the edge. Karen's spin was officially spiraling out of control. That afternoon, I got a call from Sheriff Lila Monroe. She asked if I'd be willing to come into town and provide the footage and my written statement. When I arrived, she was already laughing. "She tried to press charges," Lila said, shaking her head. "Claimed you booby-trapped your own property. But we've got the drone footage and your sensor logs. Frankly, if she keeps pushing, she's going to end up being the one charged with reckless endangerment." I handed over everything, including the screenshots of her taunting posts, and the sheriff assured me the investigation wouldn't be long. Karen, however, wasn't giving up. She hired a flashy attorney from the city and filed a civil suit against me the following day, accusing me of negligence, harassment, and attempted bodily harm. But her case was built on air. My lawyer barely had to do anything. Her own social media campaign, her livestream, her refusal to heed multiple warnings. It all told the real story. Still, the damage to her image had already begun to take root. Her HOA board called an emergency session. I wasn't there, but I heard from multiple sources that Clara stood up mid-meeting and read a list of violations Karen had committed, both against me and the HOA's own bylaws. A vote was held. The motion to remove Karen as HOA president passed with a strong majority. Meanwhile, her son quietly deleted the original video and took a break from social media altogether. I heard he had been grounded, not by Karen but by life itself. Watching your mother nearly die because of an ego trip has a way of shaking things up. Back at my cabin, the days returned to their familiar rhythm. Birds sang, the wind brushed the pine needles, and the trail remained closed. But now, instead of being ignored, the signs were respected. No one came near the path. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. It had taken one wild ride, one scream, and one miracle stop to remind everyone that nature isn't a playground for pride. It's a force to be respected. And in Karen's case, it was the teacher she never asked for, but desperately needed. 3 days after the incident on the trail, the entire town was buzzing with stories, memes, and debates about what had happened. Every coffee shop, hardware store, and bar echoed with versions of the event. Some claimed Karen had been heroic and fearless, while others called her an arrogant fool who should be thankful to be alive. The truth was somewhere in the middle, but much closer to the latter. What surprised everyone most wasn't the stunt itself, it was the fallout. Karen, instead of staying quiet and recovering, went into full-blown public relations overdrive. Her ego couldn't accept the idea of being the internet's latest punchline. She started pushing interviews and writing dramatic Facebook posts accusing me of sabotage, injustice, and conspiracy, as if she had nearly been the victim of a mountain ambush rather than her own hubris. The morning after her lawsuit announcement, I was visited by a news crew from Channel 9. They asked for an interview, and I agreed, mostly because I was tired of hearing Karen spin the story like she was Indiana Jones fighting booby trap. I stood with the cliff in the background, calmly walked the reporter through the events, pointed out the posted signs, showed the footage of her speeding past each one, and then paused at the spot where she had screamed. I didn't dramatize. I didn't mock. I just told the truth. And people could see it on my face. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed that someone could come so close to death and still not learn a thing. The reporter nodded as he reviewed the drone footage I had given him. He looked up at me and asked, "Do you think she'll do it again if she gets the chance?" I laughed once, not with humor, but the kind of dry disbelief you have when someone keeps poking a beehive and acting shocked when they get stung. "If there were 2 cliffs, she'd probably try to jump both," I said. That line somehow made it into the evening broadcast, and within hours it became the headline caption across multiple sites. People online dubbed the incident Karen Canyon Catastrophe, and her trail attempt was now being compared to amateur daredevil stunts gone wrong. Despite the viral blowback, Karen still doubled down. Her lawyers sent a formal complaint alleging I had rigged the trail to cause bodily harm and mental distress. He tried to present my nylon breakaway line as a tripwire and framed the warning signs as deceptive. He claimed the bright orange spray paint I'd used to mark erosion zones could be mistaken for trail markers. The absurdity of the argument didn't stop him from pushing forward with a formal civil case. Meanwhile, Karen continued going live on social media, this time from a rented recliner in her living room. She wore a soft neck brace and had draped herself in a blanket, as if the forest had left her crippled. What made it even more bizarre was the fact that 2 days prior she had been filmed walking around the grocery store without any brace, laughing and tossing items into a cart. The internet was quick to catch the contradiction. Someone stitched the grocery footage next to her livestream. "When the cameras are off versus when the donations are on," the caption read. Donations indeed. Karen had launched a fundraiser titled Justice for Karen, fighting back against wilderness negligence. She'd raised over $3,000 before people began demanding refunds. That money vanished faster than it had come in, and questions started piling up about what she was really using it for. The sheriff called me again, this time not to gather evidence, but to laugh. "She filed a second complaint saying you emotionally traumatized her son," Lila said, barely containing her amusement. "But the kid's video logs are still online. He was live-streaming her stunt, cheering her on, and even calling it the best day of their lives until the ATV flip. So yeah, not going far with that one either." I thanked her again for staying on top of it all, and she told me not to worry. Public opinion was firmly on my side, and her office wasn't planning to pursue anything against me. Then came the podcast. Karen, somehow still convinced that media attention would clear her name, agreed to appear on a popular regional show run by two local brothers who called themselves the Mountain Mouths. They had a reputation for roasting absurd stories and weren't known for sympathy. She sat in their studio, decked out in a new brace and sunglasses, and started recounting her tale of survival. At first, the hosts humored her, nodding along as she claimed she had been lured by a false trail and a manipulative old man with a vendetta against progress. But then they started asking questions. Why did you ignore the no trespassing signs? Why did you live stream the entire stunt if you thought the trail was dangerous? Why did you say, "Nothing can stop me," just minutes before the crash? Karen floundered. She blamed the signs, the paint, the weather, the incline. But it all fell apart when one of the hosts asked, "Wasn't your son the one holding the drone remote and encouraging you to go faster?" She froze. Her mouth opened, then shut. And then her son, bless the poor kid's honesty, walked into the studio mid-interview and said, "Mom, please stop. You almost died, and now you're just making it worse." That moment ended the podcast early, but the damage was done. The clip went viral by nightfall. People started tagging her sponsors, an ATV brand and an outdoor gear company, and asking why they were supporting someone who was not only reckless but also dishonest. The sponsors responded quickly. Both issued statements saying they had no affiliation with her actions and did not endorse unsafe behavior on private land. Her social accounts were flooded with angry comments, and the fundraiser was shut down. Her reputation had gone from misguided thrill-seeker to full-blown public embarrassment. Meanwhile, my inbox was filling with messages. Some were from local residents thanking me for keeping the trail closed and safe. Others were from fellow landowners across the country, telling me similar stories about HOA overreach, trespassing, and social media stunts gone wrong. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Sarah, a former HOA member who had resigned after Karen became president. She said, "You saved more than just her life that day. You reminded the rest of us that boundaries matter, and that nature doesn't bend to hashtags." I read that one twice. It was the first time I allowed myself to feel anything close to pride about the whole ordeal. Not because I'd gone viral, not because I'd won the public argument, but because someone out there understood. This wasn't about drama. It wasn't about internet points. It was about safety, common sense, and holding your ground when people mistake selfishness for freedom. Later that week, I received a certified letter. Karen had formally withdrawn her lawsuit. No apology, of course. No explanation. Just a bland legal document stating the action was dismissed, without prejudice. I filed it away and went back to fixing the fence she'd driven through. As I hammered the last nail, I saw her red ATV still parked in the impound lot, rusting slowly in the corner. Fitting, I thought. A machine built for thrill, now immobilized by its owner's pride. Karen stopped appearing in public for a while. Her social media went dark. The HOA appointed Clara as interim president, and their next community meeting focused entirely on restoring relationships with neighbors and respecting private land boundaries. I didn't attend, but I heard from Marvin that Karen was a no-show and her name was officially removed from the HOA's leadership roster. By the time Sunday rolled around, the forest had reclaimed its peace. The trail, freshly raked and reseeded with wildgrass, looked untouched again. I placed a new wooden sign at the base. Not flashy, not dramatic. Just a simple phrase carved into the grain. Respect the trail, or it'll teach you how. And below that, for those still tempted by glory, I added one last line. This isn't a challenge. It's a warning. 1 week after Karen's failed ATV stunt, the mood in the valley had changed. What was once a quiet undercurrent of frustration between the locals and the HOA had turned into a full-on reckoning. People who had previously stayed silent about Karen's antics were finally speaking out, emboldened by the attention her debacle had drawn. At the general store, neighbors who used to nod and move on were now openly discussing her removal from HOA leadership. I overheard a rancher laugh and say, she thought she was starring in her own action movie, but forgot there were no stunt doubles in real life. The ridicule didn't stop in town. Online, the videos of Karen's crash and the podcast fallout had taken on a life of their own. Commenters posted everything from remixed auto-tuned versions of her scream to animated reenactments where her ATV sprouted wings and flew off the cliff like a cartoon. She had become internet legend, but not in the way she imagined. But the real turning point came not in memes or gossip, but in a legal maneuver she hadn't expected. Karen had withdrawn her lawsuit, but she wasn't done trying to punish someone for her humiliation. Instead of pursuing the civil suit personally, she lobbied the HOA's board to file a collective claim against me. She argued that my trail posed a public safety hazard and that by failing to report it as such, I had endangered the entire community. She claimed the HOA had a moral obligation to act, but the board, now led by Clara, wasn't buying it. Clara scheduled a special review hearing and invited both sides to speak. I was reluctant to attend, but the sheriff herself called and encouraged me. She said, "This is your chance to shut this circus down for good." I arrived at the meeting hall expecting the usual hostility. But to my surprise, the crowd was divided. Several residents nodded politely at me. Some even thanked me quietly for trying to prevent the stunt in the first place. Karen sat at the front, still wearing her brace and flanked by a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Clara opened the meeting with a calm but firm tone, outlining the purpose of the review. Karen's lawyer presented a slideshow of the trail, zooming in on the cliff edge, the rope that had caught the ATV, and a few blurry stills of Karen's crash. He called it a death trap disguised as a hiking path. I kept my expression neutral. Then Clara asked if I had anything to present. I stood up, cleared my throat, and played a video compilation I had stitched together. Trail cam footage of Karen blowing through the broken gate, drone clips showing her speeding past multiple warning signs, and the sensor data I'd logged showing her trajectory toward the drop. When it ended, the room was silent. Clara looked at me and asked, "Anything else?" I nodded and added, "She ignored warnings, damaged my property, and nearly died because she wanted a spectacle. The only reason she's here today is because I anticipated that." Karen's lawyer tried to counter by shifting focus. He said I had a responsibility to make the trail inaccessible if it was that dangerous. I explained I had done exactly that: fencing, signage, digital sensors, and public postings. It was Karen who had cut through every line of defense, physically and legally. Then someone from the back stood up. It was Sarah, the former HOA board member. She raised a folder and said, "I have a copy of the HOA's 2022 land acknowledgement. It clearly states that Coles Trail is outside our jurisdiction and cannot be altered or accessed without consent." We all signed it. Karen did too. That sealed it. The motion to pursue collective legal action was withdrawn by majority vote. Karen's lawyer packed up without another word. But the surprises weren't over. Clara stepped to the microphone and addressed the board and attendees. As of this evening, we will be recommending permanent removal of Karen Whitmore from any HOA leadership position. A vote will follow this statement. The result was decisive, nearly unanimous. Karen, once queen of the community, sat frozen as the reality of her fall set in. Her son, who had quietly slipped into the back of the room, watched the entire thing unfold and left without speaking to her. Outside the meeting hall, I was approached by several residents, some of whom had supported Karen in the past. They apologized, saying they hadn't realized how far she'd gone. One man shook my hand and said, "You saved her life and got sued for it. That's how backwards things got." I shrugged and replied, "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because that trail doesn't give second chances." Another woman asked if I'd ever consider opening the trail to the public, with safety measures and limit. I gave her the same answer I'd always given. It's not a park, it's a preserved piece of wilderness, and it only takes one fool to ruin it for everyone. The days that followed were quieter. Karen disappeared from public view. Her house went up for sale with a private agent. Rumor was she was moving out of state to stay with family. I received a certified envelope from her lawyer containing a formal notice of withdrawal and a non-disparagement clause. I didn't sign it. I didn't need silence. I just needed closure. But before she left, Karen did something unexpected. One foggy morning, I heard a knock at my gate. I stepped out cautiously and found her standing there alone, no cameras, no brace, no entourage. She looked different, less polished, more human. Her voice was soft. "I came to see the drop," she said. I hesitated, then opened the gate and walked her to the edge. We stood in silence. She stared at the cliff and whispered, "I thought I could handle it. I didn't think I could die." I replied, "Most people don't. Until they do." She nodded slowly, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for the damage," she said. "Fence, trail signs, rope." I had no right. I took it, unsure what to say. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Thank you. Even if I didn't act like it, you saved me. I know that now." And then she walked away, fading into the trees like a ghost finally finished haunting the place. I didn't open the envelope right away. It sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I finally looked. Inside was a check, modest but fair, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Some lessons cost more than others. Yours saved me from paying the ultimate price." Weeks later, as autumn settled into the valley and the leaves turned gold and red, the trail remained quiet. No engines, no laughter, no drones. Just the wind and the distant echo of what almost was. I added one final touch to the trailhead, a carved plaque mounted on a boulder. It didn't mention names, didn't assign blame. It simply read, "Respect the edge. Nature doesn't negotiate." A quiet truth, etched in wood and stone, standing watch over a path that had nearly become a grave. And as the first snowfall dusted the ridges, I finally felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not just because Karen was gone or because the lawsuits were over, but because for once the trail had spoken, and someone had actually listened. The first snow came early that year, coating the trail in a fine white powder that softened every sound and wrapped the forest in a quiet calm. I walked the ridge that overlooked Widow's Drop, my boots crunching against the fresh layer, and paused at the edge where the world seemed to fall away. The wind was sharp but clean, and the view stretched clear across the valley, untouched and still. It had been over a month since the chaos with Karen, and though her name was still whispered occasionally in town, the storm she'd brought had passed. There were no more drone whirs in the sky, no ATV tires grinding the dirt, no crowds gathering with phones raised and egos inflated. Just silence, like the mountain had taken a deep breath and finally let it out. I wasn't naive. I knew something like this could always happen again. People had a strange ability to ignore warnings when their pride got in the way. But for now, things had changed. The trail, once targeted as a prize for entitled adventurers, had become something else entirely, a symbol, a warning, and in an odd twist, a lesson. Not just for Karen, but for the whole community. The HOA had shifted its tone dramatically since her fall from grace. Clara had done a commendable job steering them toward a more reasonable and respectful relationship with property owners, and I noticed it in the way people treated me. They didn't avoid eye contact anymore. They waved when they drove by. Some even brought pie. A week after the final snow had settled, I received a letter from the county's conservation office. They'd seen the footage, the interviews, and the coverage of the incident, and they wanted to recognize my efforts in preserving the integrity of the trail. The letter came with an invitation to collaborate on a rural land safety initiative, a program designed to educate landowners and community boards on managing wilderness areas responsibly. At first, I thought about ignoring it. I wasn't interested in turning my quiet life into a speaking tour. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't speak up, the next person might not be as lucky as Karen. I accepted on one condition: I wouldn't sugarcoat things. I wouldn't call it a community adventure program or a safe exploration guide. I would call it what it was: a boundary awareness and survival education course. And they agreed. The program launched quietly, starting with a few towns nearby. I helped design some of the materials, using parts of my trail cam footage, drone shots, and GPS logs to demonstrate real-world risk. We didn't use Karen's name, but the message was clear. There's a cost to ignoring boundaries, sometimes physical, sometimes legal, sometimes permanent. Around the same time, I got a visit from Sarah, the former HOA member who had helped call out Karen during the vote. She brought with her a group of teens from a local outdoor education club and asked if I'd be willing to walk them through the Ridge Trail, not to hike it, but to understand it. I agreed on one condition: that they only observe, not traverse. They stood quietly near the trailhead as I explained how the ground changed after rain, how the switchbacks could mislead riders, and how the angle of the cliff made it appear like a gentle slope until you were already too far gone. One of the kids, no older than 16, raised his hand and asked if anyone had ever fallen. I paused, then answered honestly, "Not yet." And that's the goal. They took photos of the signs, made notes, and left in respectful silence. It was the first time I'd allowed anyone that close to the trail in years. Meanwhile, Karen stayed gone. Her property sold to a quiet couple who asked no questions and made no noise. The name Whitmore faded from HOA documents, and her son reportedly moved in with his father out of state. Someone told me he started college and stopped using social media entirely. I didn't take any joy in her collapse, but I also didn't lose sleep over it. Actions have consequences. That's life. If anything, I hoped her silence meant she was doing some serious thinking, away from the lenses and microphones that used to be her comfort zone. But the world has a funny way of closing circles. It was just before the new year when I found a package on my gate, no return address, just a simple box tied with twine. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a small wooden model of an ATV, painted red with silver trim. Beneath it was a note in careful handwriting that read, "Not all falls are fatal. Some just knock you into reality. Thank you for catching mine." There was no name. It didn't have to be signed. I closed the box, set it on my shelf, and stood there for a long time. The kind of quiet you don't break with words. As the snow thickened and the year wound down, the mountain remained at peace. I reinforced the fencing one last time, added solar lights near the trailhead that flickered gently at dusk, and placed one more motion sensor near the midpoint. Not because I expected trouble, but because the land deserved protection. The trail hadn't changed. The cliff still waited with patient silence. But now, the people around it had changed. And that, more than anything, gave me hope. I thought often about how close things had come. How a few feet had meant the difference between life and death. How one woman's pride had nearly turned my trail into a tragedy. But instead, it had become a moment A pivot point that reminded an entire town that nature isn't something you conquer with hashtags and helmet. It's something you walk with, quietly, carefully, and never with arrogance. I spent New Year's Eve alone, as I usually did, sipping coffee by the fire and listening to the wind through the trees. Just after midnight, I stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in flannel, and looked out across the moonlit valley. The trail stretched beyond the trees, invisible beneath the snow, but still there. Always there. A line between choices. Between caution and chaos. Between ego and understanding. And I smiled, not because it was over, but because it mattered. Because sometimes the most important paths are the ones you protect, not the ones you take.